welcome to this presentation from me. My name is Morag Piers. I'm the Director of Studies here at the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. I've put the website link on the screen there. So today we're going to be talking about people whose names have changed during immigration. And the reason that we're doing this talk today is because recently we've uploaded a new course to the IIGS all about immigration and emigration from Scotland. It's really interesting. I'm sure you'll find a lot in there to enhance your learning. So we're just going to talk through a few of the issues that you might come across when you're looking for people who have changed their names. So here's the couple of slides that I've put up here. The first one on the left you can see is Ellis Island in New York. This is the major port where so many people from all over Europe entered into the United States to make a new life. And the picture, the painting there just gives an idea of what things were like for these people when they left everything behind to sail to the new world. I just want to be clear here what we're actually talking about. We're talking about people who have consciously made a decision to change their names for whatever reason. And we're not talking about people whose names have been misspelled or who people whose names have spelled in various different ways across the records. Now that happened loads, mainly because people couldn't read or write, and it really didn't matter how you spelled your name. It didn't matter to them, and it didn't really matter to the record takers. I'm sure we've all come across examples of that in our own research, but that's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about another group of people who, for whatever reason, chose to change their names and how you would go about tracking these changes. And it's not always easy. Okay, so why did people change their names? There's lots of reasons, and obviously we can give some of the main reasons why people change their names, but there are other ones, and you don't really know why people change their names if you can't really go back and ask them. So there's various reasons why people might have wanted to change their names, especially when they emigrated or immigrated to a different country. And the main one of those is probably fitting in or discrimination. People wanted to leave their past behind them. They wanted to acclimatize to the new society that they were in. They wanted to sound more American, more Canadian, more British, however that might be. They might also have a very difficult to pronounce foreign sounding surname to an English or an American speaking ear. And they might think that they just want to simplify things a little bit. We've all had the experience if you've got an unusual name of having to constantly spell out your name to people. They might just anglicize their name a bit. So a Giovanni from Italy might become a Joe or a Joseph or a Jack or something like that. They might want to leave the past behind them. This is more of a sort of a symbolic act. You know, I'm now becoming British. I'm now becoming an American. I'm leaving my past behind me, and a new start in a new country. The last point here I just want to cover quickly before we go on. A lot of people did change their names when they were adopted. Now, adoption, especially in Scotland, was not a legal process until the 1920s. Before that, it was very ad hoc. There were no laws about people being adopted. Children, especially when they'd lost their parents, were brought up by an uncle and an aunt or family friends, and quite often just adopted the names of the families that they were living with. And this was never done officially. There was never any official paperwork to show that a child that was born as Edward Smith then became Edward Jones. So you're unlikely to find any paperwork around that fact. But it was super common, especially if a woman lost her husband early and had several children. When she remarried, a lot of times the children would take her second husband's surname as an unofficial adoption, and sometimes would be listed as children, not stepchildren. So it's something to bear in mind that you won't find any paperwork around adoption, but this is a really common reason for children, especially, why they change their names. We're also going to talk mostly about men in this presentation. Women change their surnames far more frequently than men, mainly because when women get married and remarried or divorced, they quite commonly change their surname. And we've all come across these issues around tracing women when you can't find a marriage record and you don't know what their married name might be. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to talk a bit about myth busting. Now, I'm sure everyone that dipped any toes in genealogy has heard the myth about name changes at Ellis Island. And it goes something like that when the ancestor arrived in Ellis Island and gave their name to the clerk couldn't understand what they were saying, so just wrote something down that they thought was correct. And there's lots of reasons why people think this is true. The main one appears to be the film The Godfather. There's a famous scene when one of the Italians is coming into Ellis Island And this is what happens to him at Emigration in Ellis Island. But this is not what happened. In reality, what used to happen was that the shipping companies that were leaving Hamburg, Cherbourg, Liverpool, Glasgow, wherever these people were coming from, they would compile the passenger list of all the people that they loaded onto the ship in their home port. And then when they got to North America, that list would be provided to the clerks at Ellis Island, who would just check people off. So they weren't writing anything. They were literally going through the list as written in the UK or in France and checking people off that list. So this whole thing about, oh, my name was changed to Ellis Island, take it with a massive pinch of salt. There are other places that names might have changed, but Ellis Island is probably not one of them. Okay, so let's move on to now talking about what kind of changes people made and how you would trace those in the records. And some of the changes are super simple. So the first one I've put up here is two records. The one on the left is a Scottish census record from 1891, and it shows David Karnofsky. He's 3. So he was born around 1888. His parents are Samuel and Dina, and he was born in Glasgow. But you can probably tell by the surname that these are not ethnically Scottish people. They've probably come from Russia, Eastern Europe, somewhere like that. And right enough, as a lot of people did, they decided that Scotland wasn't their final destination and they were going to move on. And a few years later, here we've got David's declaration of intention to naturalise as a US citizen in New York. And at this point, he's decided he's going to drop the Vsky off the end of his name and he's just going to be David Carno. And that sounds easier to pronounce for an American or an English ear. It's more simple to write, and it sounds less foreign, if you like. It helps him fit in more with his new society in the United States of America. And this is super common, but if you are looking for David in the records and you're searching for Karnowski as the full name, you're not going to bring up this record. So you have to consider about using wildcards, about using asterisks, fuzzy matching, searching for beginnings and ends of names and that kind of thing to try and identify this sort of change. And this is another one that's very similar. So again, we've got the 1901 census here, and we've got Joseph Strockstein. And again, he's living in Glasgow, but he was born, it says British Russia. So whether he was a British citizen born in Russia or a British part of Russia is unclear. Anyway, his parents are Isaac and Rachel, and he's come to Scotland. Unlike the previous example, he hasn't moved. So Joseph's obviously done quite well for himself. He's gone to university at a time where it's very unusual for children to go to university. And at this point, he's changed his name and he's become Joseph Strathdean rather than Strockstein. So you can see the names sound very familiar, similar rather, sorry. But Strathdean obviously sounds a lot more Scottish than Strockstein. And this is Joseph embracing his new life in the UK and leaving his German, Russian roots behind him. So this is another kind of thing you'd be looking at. And again, if you're searching for STR asterisk names, you might come up with this. But if you're searching for other names with maybe a C and a K in the middle, you're not going to find it. So you have to be a bit more creative in your searching. And it's not just the first names, second names that change. It's also some people used changed their given names. So here we've got an example from slightly earlier in the 19th century. This man was a Prussian academic who lived in Edinburgh and he taught German to the affluent classes in Edinburgh. And he was Karl Edward Aue, and he was from Germany. His surname stayed the same all the way through the records, but the Karl Edward with a U quite often changes to Charles Edward, which is the standard British spelling of Karl Edward. And he sort of switched between these two different spellings throughout his life. Sometimes he was Karl Edward, sometimes he was Charles Edward. It just depends. So you have to be a bit more flexible about how you're searching and don't discount matches just because they don't match perfectly. Okay, moving on to Anglicizations. No, this is one of the more common reasons for people changing their names. They wanted a name when they moved to their new country, which sounded as if it was American, and it was easy for American people to pronounce. They could read it. It sounded like a standard English name. Especially people that were from Poland or Russia, which had difficult surnames to a British ear or an American speaking ear. So you've got Charles here. And I don't know what Charles's name was originally, whether he was Carl or Carl with a K. We don't know, but he's Charles, and he was Charles Andrew when he naturalized in Ohio. But his original name was Andriuszkiewicz. Now, I'm not very good at Polish, but I think something like that. But you can see immediately that Andrew is so much easier for an English speaker to pronounce than the Polish. So at this point, when he's naturalized, he was only 10. He was born in Scotland. His parents were probably Russian. He's come brought to Ohio with his parents, and at the age of 10, he's naturalizing. Now, how much say he had over this name? Who knows? It's probably his parents that have decided that they're going to naturalize and change their surname, and Charles has just gone along with it. But again, if you're looking for Andri names, you're not going to find it, so you're going to have to be a bit more creative with your searching. And this is similar. So this is Mitchell. And Mitchell's he turns up on a passenger list for a boat that's leaving from Glasgow in 1942. He's 21. So whether he was born in Scotland, we don't know. He's listed as Polish, so he's possibly born in Poland, come to Scotland to work or to live for a short time, and is now moving on to the United States. And on the right-hand side, you can see this is another record from him in a death record in the United States, and his name is given as Justin. He's changed his Jewishic name to Justin, for all the reasons that we talked above about difficulties of pronunciation and spelling with all these Z's and C's and Z's and K's. One thing to notice from this is it does say that he was Polish, but on the other side of the record, on the American death record, it says he was born in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, and it's just something to bear in mind, especially when you're looking at death records, that it's secondhand information. So it's whoever completes the death certificate is telling what they know about Mitchell. He's not obviously telling it himself because he's the one that's dead. So it's something to bear in mind, especially when you're looking at death records. Okay, so moving on, we're now looking at another Anglicization, and this is another declaration of intention to naturalize as an American citizen from Texas. And we've got Petrus Tamulavixuis. In Scotland, we had a whole load of Lithuanian people living in Scotland at the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th century, working in the mines. The mining companies in central Scotland would go over to Lithuania and recruit workers. Many of them came over to Scotland, worked for a couple of years in the mines, and then went back to Lithuania. Others married and stayed in Scotland, married other Lithuanians or local Scottish people, stayed in Scotland, had children here. Others decided that they were going to head further afield, and appears to what's happened to Petrus. He's come here, he's born in Hamilton, so he's probably the child of one of these people that have come over. And then at some point he's decided he's off to America. So he's moved over to Texas. And at the time of his naturalization in Texas, he's decided to ditch his old surname of Petra, of his old given name of Petrus, and become Pete, which is a fairly obvious change. And he's ditched his surname and he's become Tamluri. He maybe thought that sounded a wee bit Scottish. It maybe does a little, but it's not a standard British name. But it's certainly much easier to pronounce and to write than what he's ditching in terms of his old surname. But on these declarations of intention documents, always both names will be stated. So this is a really good place to start looking for proof of changes if these people have naturalized. And finally, the Anglicizations, some of them are really obvious. So here we've got another New York naturalization for somebody that was born in Germany and has come to Britain and is naturalized in Great Britain. And then at some point later on than that, he's decided that he's moving over to the United States and he's naturalizing in New York. And his first name hasn't changed. He's Adolf or Adolf, as we would say here. And his original surname in Germany was Kohlmann, Kohlmann, Kohlmann. And he's decided that when he goes to America, he's going to ditch the old Coleman and he's become Coleman, which is much more of the standard English spelling, but it's the same name, right? And there's all kinds of reasons why we're doing this. You know, this is the sort of the First World War period. There's a lot of anti-German sentiment. So by becoming Coleman, that's maybe more acceptable to him than being Coleman. And he doesn't have to explain himself that he's actually a naturalized American. He's not British and he's not German anymore. And this kind of thing happens all the time. But again, you can see if you're searching for surnames starting with a K, you're not going to bring up this change of Coleman. Okay, so less obvious changes. So some people did choose something that was vaguely related to their initial name. Others just went completely rogue and decided to call themselves something completely different. So here we have Antonina Rose Edwards. And she's chosen Edwards as her surname, But if you can look at her original name, it was Antonina Rosa Goldfeder Pincus. So she's ditched that completely and has become Antonina Rose rather than Rosa, and has used Edwards as her surname. We don't know why she's done this. It may be something to do with her marriage. Her husband is John, but if you look, her husband was married before, she was married to her husband before she emigrated. So what's going on here, we don't know. You'd have to do a bit more digging into finding out who John was and why Antonina's changing her name. But it's something to bear in mind if you're not finding records for the surname that you think you're looking for, you search for the given names, and then something might come up that makes you think, hang on, is this the same person? Okay, and finally, so this is the last slide I'm going to show you. And this is the reason why everybody should be looking at naturalization documents. If you have someone who has emigrated through the UK or from the UK and has gone to America or Canada or Australia or any of these other countries where you can get hold of a naturalization record, you get so much detail. So here right at the top, we've got Mary Woods, and she's formally known as Mary Martin. So we've got her maiden name there. She was born as Mary Martin, and she's now married, and her surname is Woods. You've got so much information on this, on these kinds of forms. You've got her date of birth. You know how old she is. You know where she's living. You know when she was married. You know how when she came to the United States. So you can work out whether she married in Ireland or in the United States. You can look at where she was married, so where to look for the marriage record. You've got the dates of birth of all of her children, and you can work out from her emigration date whether they were born in the United States or if they were born in Ireland. And then you can start looking for marriage and birth records for all of her children, and that should give you a much better clue about what's going on with Mary and when Mary changed her name. And this is especially important when you're looking for really common names such as Mary. And you've got the ship detail there of when she came to New York and on which ship. So you can then go back, look at her passenger records, look at her Ellis Island entries, and that should give you much more information about Mary. So it's just about pulling all these little pieces of information out from all these different records and putting them all together and see what happens. So finally, tracing people that change their names, a bit of a summary. So we're not, this can be tricky. It's not easy. If you are looking for someone that you can't find, it may not be that you're doing it wrong. It may be that they have changed their name to something that you would never think to look for. So just keep noting down possibilities and then going back to it later. And look at other databases. If you've looked on Ancestry, look on Family Search. If you've looked on Family Search, try MyHeritage or Find My Past, one of the other databases to see what pops up. You may have to get a bit creative with how you look at people. As we saw in the last slide, you can look at lots of different records for the same person. I would also advise looking at records for other people in the same family. So if you have one sibling who you can't trace, you think they may have changed their name, look at the other siblings. Have they changed their name too? What have they done? And that might give you a bit of a clue about where to look for further information about that person. Remember, you're going to have to look at lots of different countries. So if somebody has come to the US from Ireland, from Scotland, from England, you're obviously going to have to look at Scottish, English, Irish records where they exist for that person. If the person has come via Scotland from somewhere else, so lots and lots of people from Eastern Europe, Jewish immigrants came to Scotland, stayed maybe 5 or 6 years, had a couple of kids, and then went on to North America. You may then be into a multi-country search involving different alphabets, different languages, different availabilities of records, and that can be really, really complicated. So you do the easy stuff first. And this is similar to sideways research. So if you can't find them in the records, could they be in the newspapers? Could there be land records? Could there be census records? And just remember that if you're finding the same name repeated over multiple documents, that is probably what they've changed their name to, even if they haven't naturalized. It could well be that they have not officially changed their name. Nowadays in the UK, if you want to formally change your name, you have to go to a lawyer and have it lodged through an official process called deed poll. But that's a modern concept. Back in the 19th and early 20th century, there was no need for that. People just did what they wanted, called themselves what they wanted. So it can be really tricky to trace name changes, and you may just have to pull together all the evidence and come up with the best case scenario. And narrowing the gap If you can't find any detail about a name change, you might have to find out for how long they were using one name and when they started using the other, and just try and narrow the gap of when the change occurred as much as possible. So that's really all I want to say about people that change their names. It's one of the more challenging aspects of genealogy, but it's fun. And it can be really, really rewarding when you finally crack the puzzle. So if you want to know more about emigration, immigration, especially from a Scottish perspective, I'd really encourage you to go to the genealogicalstudies.com website, and from there sign up, and hopefully I'll see you on the course soon. So thanks very much for listening.